Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for third and final installment of three-part webinar with Daniel Schwartz. Today, in the last installment, we will, among other things, we will finally get to the glaciers, and we're going to talk, well, Daniel's going to talk also about his latest book, which basically we also used as a title for the whole webinar, While the Fires Burn, a Glacier Odyssey. And we're also going to touch base on something that has been announced today, and I'm just quoting from Al Jazeera. UN chief backs new blueprint to end suicidal war on nature. So we're going to get to that as well towards the end of it. As usual, feel free to ask questions and in our Q&A box. We are also recording this, so you are going to get the link to the recorded session for those who want to revisit it or for those who couldn't make it today. Daniel, thank you very much for coming back to us. And I'd say, shall we hit it on?
We shall. In we go.
Hi. So Daniel.
So the previous part, the film Bringing Down Images from the Mountains, of which I hope many have seen it, was a case study within the project While the Fires Burn. Now this concluding lecture will address the Odyssey alluded to in the subtitle. While the Fires Burn, the Glacier Odyssey. More precisely, I will talk about the autobiographical background and my artist practice, which includes appropriation of historical documents. Here you see two historical documents, the source being my father, 1955, from a Super 8 film, A Glacier, which sort of already then looks like a skeleton, and underneath spectators waiting on a motor race in the 40s. So you already have the two things: fossil energy, individual movement, cars, everything, and the nature. I will also talk about what the mountains do to the human mind, and how the encounter between the dualism of humans and nature plays out in high altitudes. Here you can see a small erratic boulders. You see how much the subject enters my living space. I have erratic boulders in my bookshelves. This is a small one, typically shallow form. That's what happens to stones when they are transported by glaciers and eroded between the surface of the glacier, the bottom of the glacier, and the bedrock. This presentation will lead from the relics of the Holocene glaciation to the darkening peaks of the Swiss Alps. The leitmotifs will be erratic boulders. Here's a big one. It's about 1 kilometer away from where I am now. And it will lead from the age of the Enlightenment, which coincided with the Little Ice Age. That was when the glaciers advanced far down into the valleys and brought such erratic boulders like this one into my neighborhood 28,000 years ago. And we'll end up in the Anthropocene. You remember I had mentioned and explained that new geological age in the very first lecture. These slides, they mark stages of my journey along humanity's suicidal path or troubled path of progress. And the glaciers here are presented as a metaphor of memory, and the agony of the glaciers is an evidence of our climate crisis. Also, I will talk about the moral perception of mountain landscape and how it is juxtaposed to their conquest as terrain of projects of power. Now, the starting point is of this project was the glacially formed Jura Piedmont. You see that little red streak up there, and that's basically there were these two pictures of mine from the early 60s. I'm sitting there together with my mother, and in our picture my father on a small erratic boulder. Now, the map which you see in the background is Switzerland at the latest last maximum glaciation, when all this was covered by ice. You see a little blue dot circle and a little blue circle on the top. So this erratic boulder came from the Mont Blanc Massif, and it took about 4,500 years to travel down to where it is now, where this little dot is. And the house where I grew up stood basically there on the moraine which this huge ice shield during the last glacial maximum had created. So you see, I think I want to make the point that you need to know. We spoke a lot about information you need to know and how much you see and how much you only see when you know the background. So for me, the terrain, the territory is very, very important. You see here a mountain which I ran up when I was young and still go up today. And where this little white circle is, I found these fossils. So you see, it's really sort of, and this is the starting point, because from this mountain, I'm looking across the Swiss Midlands and you see the Swiss Alps. Now, this last glaciation, that's about how Switzerland could have looked 28,000 years ago, where you see this famous fog in October and then the mountains sailing above the sea of clouds. Underneath you see two gentlemen looking from also a cave which is nearby, and in the very, very distance of faded away in this old aquatinta, you see the same mountain ranges. So it's really about the appreciation of landscape as well, and how do you approach landscape, because I think a prerequisite for the appreciation of nature is cultural and historical memory, and I think this is formed through the study of visual, literary, cartographic and scientific documents and a sensual encounter with objects of nature. Here you see a huge erratic boulder coming from the lower valley. And you see the small insert is by Henry Fox Talbot. The geologists, how during the Enlightenment eras, they also tried to get enlightenment about knowledge, the natural sciences, how came things into being. And for me, an approach was, for some of the work I did here, and you could call that sort of a conceptual art method or practice, walks or rides, bike rides. Bicycle anyway, a very economic way of moving forward, very human, also the speed. So that just shows you how I like to look at things close and understand. Another sort of historical document, this is a dead ice lake. So when this huge ice shield, which I've introduced, drew back, some chunks of ice got detached and eventually melt. And after 4,000 years, they finally had melted. But in the meantime, the ground underneath had been frozen and thus the lake emerged. And these lakes, of course, were there where the first people settled, the stilt dwellers, when the Holocene set in with a stable climate about 15,000 years ago. Now, here, if you look carefully, you see at the terminus of that ice shield tongue, you see a little line. And basically, we walked along this line and it took us 7 hours. Now, this walk sort of was, we tried to evoke the end, the terminus of that ice shield 28,000 years ago. And along the way, we met people, asked their date of birth and accumulated the lifespans these people had lived. And sort of that puts in context also sort of this huge, amazing time relations between geological times, which make everything so difficult to understand, and human lifespans. So you see birthdays of passers-by recorded while walking from Langendorf to Langenthal, contouring the lobe of the ice cap covering the alpine foreland at the peak of the last glaciation, 21,500 years before present. So totally 953 years of human life, as opposed to this 21,000 years and everything covered in 7 hours. So I think these are very interesting relationships. Now here we are at the Rhone Glacier, and that's sort of a polished rock where the glacier once was. And you see these very fine lines. These are the streaks, so-called striations. When a glacier moves across the bedrocks, it leaves these amazing things. And in front, you have sort of the plunder from glacier's domestication for tourists. As the glacier retreats, of course, all that plunder collapses as well. So I should say that sort of quickly going back to the naturalists' debate on the origin of erratic boulders, how did they came to these flatlands, where they see them? So thinking about that and help to understand glacier physics that are responsible for advances and retreats, and to the formulation of the Ice Age hypothesis with glacials and interglacials as natural forces responsible for the face of the landscape that emerged after the end of the last glacial maximum. That's where we have reached now. So my project was sort of the result of a synthesis of scientific observation and artistic action, which helps to understand environmental processes. It is a glaciology in pictures in the essence. Here you see a futile attempt to protect the vanishing Rhone glaciers, are basically parts of it where, since more than 100 years, they dig a glacier grottos for tourists to see it, and because it collapses every year, they have to create a new grotto. So what you see here is people of the early members of the Swiss Natural Society, Natural History Society, as they try to understand what happens in the glaciers. So you see they made lines of stones. These date back to 1873 to mark the extent of the glacier, and they put stone lines across the glacier surface, and they found out that in the center of the surface, these stones move faster than at the edges. So that was experimental geology. Like today, you have experimental archaeology, where they try to make tools the way Bronze Age people did it. So as photography had become established by 1850s, earth sciences circles began to work with the alpine images produced by the new medium. The two earliest known alpine photographic images were both daguerreotypes, and they were produced just days apart in August 1849. Here we see a reproduction from 1890 of the Rhone Glacier by Gustave Dartel. Originally, it was a daguerreotype. The daguerreotypes were destroyed. They were just used to produce these books.
Daniel, given how Swiss are pedantic, how accurate or how detailed is Swiss, how would I say, archive or historiography of glaciers in Switzerland?
It's a good question. I think Switzerland really is the place, and we will come a few slides later to the actual glacier, which was the place where glaciology had been invented. And the Rhone Glacier, which you saw before, was, because it was very accessible, it became the first glacier of which systematically its fluctuations had been measured. So it was the beginning of the longest glacial measurement records anywhere. And that, of course, it happened because the shepherds and the peasants, you know, they were very religious people, and they were afraid when these glaciers advanced during the Little Ice Age, which ended in the 1850s, because these glaciers advancing so far, like the one you see here, it was threatening the pastures and the villages, the churches. So they made pilgrimages to stop the glaciers, and a couple of years ago they made pilgrimages to make the glaciers advance, and even they had to call the Vatican, and the Vatican had to approve such pilgrimages to either stop or ask now for advance of glaciers. And all these pictures, this one or the ones which you see on both sides, left and right, are part of a very, very long and accurate photogrammetric and photographic studies about the glacier extent. And what you see in the middle, is just a second. What you see in the middle is sort of orthophotographic photography and renderings to make simulations of the landscape which will surface once the glacier has disappeared. So the top one, this is just 3 pictures from a section of, I think, of 12 images. You see how much 2000 and then 2100 the glacier is completely gone, but now it's possible to know about the landscape which will surface below the glacier, and that's very important for people who want to build dams and water storage and reservoirs, of course. And resources, you know, this is a sort of a town scribe of Lucerne. He made weather observations, and he speaks about really severe weather and, you know, children having to feed on grass, you know, and food riots, all these things which we know from Haiti and other places that happened during the summers without winter, also later on in the 19th century, when during the Little Ice Age, where it was really cold and harvest didn't work, and there was food shortage. So all these old chronicles are important. Sort of, I tried myself to do something and take a little, sort of contribute something small to future generations. So on 12th August, I was on the Rhone Glacier and I exposed some images, and we noted the precise coordinates. Everybody, helicopter pilot and people who were with me, we signed the flight manifesto, and I put the exposed film into a little canister and threw it into a glacier crevasse. So somebody will find this thing eventually at one time, and then from this place where they found it, they can see how far it has traveled, and that itself will give some indications about glacier fluctuations. Maybe the film will be processed if people still know about analog photography. I think it will not take 100 years until it will be found. Sure, it will be found earlier. Here you see also using as archival things, old photographs which I find on flea markets or collect as part of my collection. It's the same place. You can see already from the old image on the left-hand side, if you look carefully down where the glacier makes a curve, how much white there is, in the middle just a black band. And if you look in my picture, the bottom on the right side, you see things different. You know, it's black, and in the middle is a little white of glacier left. So here you see one of these artists' renderings of natural scientists sitting exactly on that moraine where 2 glaciers meet, where you see in the picture to the left, it's where 2 glaciers meet. And that's exactly where the sort of Ziyah's question before about measuring glaciers and observing them systematically. So these people are there, and they use these big erratic boulders sitting on the middle moraines, and they find out these things move, they are not stable. So when they went back the year later, these things had moved, and eventually this big stone was observed for 50, 60 years until it disappeared into a huge crevice. That's where we are here. We go a little bit further down. If you imagine now you walk down from my photograph towards to the lower, and then that's where we come to the end of the glacier. The map there was the first scientific map produced by people around Agassiz in 1848, and you see the black line which we have put on top. It shows the glacier as it was in 2016. In 2014, I took a picture of that collapsed crater, which you see, and the lower picture of that vertical diptych. And a year later, this collapsed crater had already crashed, and it's no more a lake, it has opened. And you remember that piece of wood which I showed before in the last session. That's where this piece of wood surfaced, the year 2016, when the diptych, the horizontal diptych, was shot. Now that's the collapsed crater. And that's the lower diptych here is part of it just 2 years later. So you see how quick these things go. Now, of course, it has to do with, we come now so to the sublime and the beautiful, but also what makes people afraid, because it was always both things, right? Sort of in the context of mountain, and sort of, as you have seen now, my pictures really sort of show this world of the Alps is out of order. And before people sort of felt there was some order, they saw some aesthetic order also. And in that context, we read Edmund Burke's The Sublime. He postulated the so-called the sublime in his philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful, published in 1757. And Burke associated the sublime with terror, the beautiful with order. Now, what you see here is this is a variation of the original sketch. It had been done in Paris. The original sketch had been done by Caspar Wolf, the Swiss alpine painter, and the original figure, the head of the original figures reaches the sort of the bottom of these erratic boulders. Now, to make the taste for the public then, this fear also, which sort of radiated from the Alps, he gave the people just as ants being in awe in front of this amazing thing, this erratic boulder. This is the first daguerreotype by Ruskin and helped by his servant Hobbes. Now, as you can see, my idea was not to continue to depict the classical traditional way. I really sort of, my Theatrum Alpinum, as I like to call it, wanted really sort of to I wanted to say another way around. I began to instill a lingering sense of vertigo in my images, and I thought like this would correspond with my world as I saw it being out of order. And you know, if Caspar Wolf had made mountains geologically readable, so his skies were instrumental in making them a geographic reality. So in my photographs, the horizon is the exception. And even when I'm looking at, it is somehow looking down. I'm looking down on erosion, collapse, and vanishing. And my sceneries are dissected. just as glaciers are dissected, and that's why their number also increases as they melt. So in my mind, I had really the green Alps of the future. Yeah, now change of place. We're in Pakistan, the Raikund Glacier, and here you can see now a huge, a very, very huge erratic boulder stranded on a melting cone of ice. And if I would depict my friends and guides who were with us, and as we afterwards stood under these erratic boulders, the proportions would have been about like in that French engraver's variation of Caspar Wolff's work, which we have seen before in the Aqua Tinta. I had in the first lecture, I hadn't mentioned about sort of alluded to this war on water, war on resources playing out in the Himalayas, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and so forth. And so we're going to look a little bit into projects of power and failure in the mountains. You see the same boulder there in the left-hand part of the triptych. You see how huge it is. It's just an incredible piece of stone which came down from the slopes of Nanga Parbat, because Karakoram is all earthquake territory. So, as we know, forays into high altitudes not always happen in search of enlightenment. Already the great game played out between British India and the Tsarist empire for control of the Afghan buffer kingdom had brought the great massives of Western Asia, Karakoram, Pamir, Hindu Kush, to the forefront of politics, geopolitics. In the 1930s, and far away from the would-be theaters of World War II in the making, these massives, as well as the Himalaya, became contested terrain in the race for the first ascent of a summit above 8,000 meters. So today, as glaciers melt, traces of these projects of power, human remains, film canisters, fragments of equipment came to light, and they tell the tales of failures in the mountains. The next few slides are stills from the film we made in 2018 about my work, and in which the glacier project was a leitmotif too. Together with historic documents, chronicles, literature, maps, drawings, and photographs, object finds contribute to the understanding of glacier fluctuations as they're exposed to anthropogenic global warming. And before I mentioned that finds, my film capsule at some point might give an indication on the movement of glacier. Now, these finds we made in 2016. In 2015, I had photographed them in situ, and they had moved incredibly far from where I had photographed, and the order was completely different. Heavy objects had gone down, light objects still were on the surface. So all this is indications about how glaciers, the glacial mechanics and physics. So it is in the nature of glaciers that disappearance comes with emergence, and emergence not only of human remains and technofossils, but of memories and remembrance as well. So the glacier looking glass is a part of a spine. The glacier looking glass, however, confronts with a bitter reality. Surfacing of glacial ecological finds equals the loss of our shared climate archive, more precisely of the gases contained in polar and other ice cores. The less prehistoric climate history data, the more difficult it will be to simulate and predict environmental scenarios for the future of the planet. So these films were exposed in the 30s or are unexposed. It's difficult to retrieve them. I have not tried yet, but maybe there's something on it, maybe not, who knows.
I'm surprised. How come you didn't try to retrieve the films?
Well, you know, I thought I would have to do that on controlled green light, you know, sort of the film capsules. So, you know, they have remained for 90 years, so they can remain a little bit more. You know, I like to have some of the some enigmas. It was the strange thing was because that sort of, if you want, conceptual art piece I'd done was throwing my own film into the glacier, and had happened the year before, and now I'm going to find films of people who were killed in one of these tragic accidents, which the Germans tried really to, you know, to declare war on the Nanga Park, but it was part of a propaganda efforts, of course, of Nazi Germany. You know, so they really made their desperate attempts and had 2 exhibitions. They all ended in utter disaster. You know, with many people getting killed. And the finds here are from these failed attempts to conquer the Nanga Parbat as a sort of a propagandistic effort too. And of course, if you find these things, then 80 years later, it's quite spooky.
But I think we should have an event where you actually develop those films live. No, I'm serious. Come on, it's amazing. It's like a time capsule.
You know, we contacted these people who in Germany who are actually sort of the Alpine Society, who is actually, you know, who is the successor of the Reichssportverein, as it was called in the 30s. So they have, you know, they sort of have a not sort of clear, they have an ambiguous relationship to such finds, you know. So I think these things still need some, you know, it opens wounds, as I said, you know, glacier finds, they bring up memories, you know, and not all memories are nice memories, right?
Still.
So here we are again in the center of Switzerland, sort of where we're looking at sort of the big confluence, the Concordia. And there was a strange thing in 2012 when I started. We flew up to Concordia and we passed that point where you can see 2012 at the end of that red line. And a day later, and I photographed sort of moraines in the middle of the glacier, and a day later, objects were found precisely on that spot. So I looked out to the right, and if I would have looked out to the left, I would have probably seen these things. So it very quickly became clear that these were the mortal remains of the 3 brothers from a nearby valley who were accompanied by a neighbor and last seen on 4th March 1926. And there where you see that field, 1926, that's about the area where they were lost in a thunderstorm. They knew the area very, very well. And after missing for 86 years, which corresponds to 4/5 of the residence time elapse between the moment when an ice crystal melts onto the surface of the glacier and it comes out at the front. So that's the speed of ice travel. These 2 pictures on top are historic photographs, and they were taken 1928. So somewhere in the right-hand picture, somewhere up there where you see that pass, below that pass, at that point, these 3 or 4 actually alpinists were already dead, enshrined in ice, and the picture which you see down is the actual finding site taken by one of the pilots of the helicopter, because that had been, of course, become a crime site. And I was allowed to use then these imageries because, as I said before, my project went together with scientists. They made a research about how long it took, and they reconstructed the trajectory of these set of forensic remains. I photographed some of them and chose 3 to combine with my glacial photographs. That's how a display in an exhibition looked. Yeah, so Wildfires Burn was really conceived as an awareness project and a sequel to the earlier Delta work, which I've introduced in the first lecture. But once finished, it had morphed. That was 2017 when the book came out, and 18 when the exhibition happened. And by then it had morphed into a call for action, because no longer did global warming affect only those wretched of the earth, the people to whom which I tried to show in dignity in Bangladesh and faraway places. Increasingly advanced societies had met their destiny as well. But instead of preparing for the worst, they had continued to apply Band-Aid until denial of anthropogenic global warming had become impossible. Switzerland, which is the guardian of the European water castle, is confronted with thawing permafrost, which destabilizes the slopes of darkening peaks. The recent campaign to save glaciers is naive, very naive. It ignores the facts. It ignores glacier fluctuations according to glacial and interglacial cycles, which are driven, as we have seen, by the planet's orbital obliquity, and the glaciers delay the response to carbon dioxide emissions since the beginning of the industrial age, and above all, since the 1970s. So the prospect of green Alps frightens the government of Switzerland, a country where the seemingly eternal ice is a source of social and national identity. The stasis vis-a-vis the dynamic climatic process slowly gives way to an understanding that structural changes are overdue, but e-cars, for instance, are a self-deceptive business, as the trend remains a cynic lie as long as extraction of rare metals overseas and production of lithium batteries continues, even in places where changes are affordable and would be possible. Very often the political climate is still far from suitable for glaciers. That's in Pakistan again. Looking at the glacial front today is confronting the deeds of our past, because, as I said, of the time lag of slow-moving ice in response to global warming. As alpinists, the Swiss can link their biography with glacial chronology. But here we are in Peru. But today, as glacier portals, here we see a glacier portal in the Cordillera Blanca. Today, as glacier portals collapse faster than a child learns to speak, this is an ambiguous enterprise. At the Roman Glacier, a century after John Muir, the American naturalist and traveler, literally saw the glacier and the Belvedere Hotel rubbing shoulder. Remember the historic image which I showed at the beginning. And the torn layers of fleece that now are a pitiable sight, a farce, a metaphor for lingering denial of the climate crisis. But there is some glimpse of hope, because for when a glacier dies, life begins, because simultaneously to global heating, the growing areas of recently bared glacier forefields provide new ecological niches for lichen communities. And here the process of vegetation colonization and succession of pioneer to climax communities can be studied. But whether this is the beginning of a trajectory to an Earth still inhabitable after warming is beyond our imagination. And if I see things happening, here we are in the Karakorum again. The map is a Chinese map from the 1980s. When they built the Karakorum highway, they had to find out about the glacier advance. Now, the tongue of this glacier has retreated back, basically that black line on the profile, and now that was photographed in 2015. There's basically they're building a highway now across the Karakorum, and you see, so as long as such interventions with nature happen as I will remain in dark days. The picture below is from NASA from 2005, and it shows in Papua New Guinea these little tiny blue patches are the last remaining glacier fields of the Puncture Giaya, the only Pacific glaciers. And the big hole in pink, this is a huge gold mine which controls the access to the glaciers. Now that's why we call the Anthropocene now sort of the Anthropocene, because humans leave irreversible changes. We penetrate the planet, whereas the first still dwellers, they bored holes in bones, and we penetrate the planet, and tunneling and mining and these things are all irreversible. So 2005, this NASA picture was taken. I think the very small and the second smallest piece of glaciers have disappeared, and the larger one has fragmented in 3 or 4 small patches. So if you want to say goodbye to a glacier, you need the help of the gold mine, and B, you need to hurry up. Maybe in Uzbekistan and in Pakistan, you see the care with how these Afghan refugee children wait until the tank of water in that camp will be refueled, and on top you see an absolute cynic and perverse way of using nature. Also, we are in Uzbekistan, and this is a tea drinking society, also imposing now coffee drinking is also a cultural re-education project just for benefits of a company. I mean, it's outrageous. Here we are back in the Cordillera Blanca, looking at the rest of a glacier. We are 5,000 meters above sea level, looking at Pastoruri Glacier. Thank you.
So Daniel, let me just quickly jump. There's a question from Paul Marotta, and he's apologizing if you already answered this. So he's asking, do you work with other writers or experts in doing this work for scientific accuracy, or has your work and research become this scientifically accurate? It's quite remarkable the level of knowledge about this that you have as a photographer. And he's about to start a mentored climate change, global warming projects on my own this year. And it involves a month in the field. And this is the kind of thing that worries me the most. So I'm looking on my own for an expert to partner with. And he's thanking you for inspiration.
I think it's a very, I encourage everybody who's undertaking any project, whether that's architecture or whatever it is, you know, go and don't be shy to ask for help. And for me, it was clear that this project, I want to do it with, as a co-production with scientists, because they informed my eye. You know, I wanted to acquire what Ruskin called the informed pair of eyes, a vital tool, because when you fly with a helicopter, we saw it in that film in Uganda, you need to immediately know what you're looking at. Otherwise, you just produce images and images which don't tell the tale. I think if somebody embarks now on a project on climate and environment and human behavior and the dualism of human intervention and nature, you want images to be records, to be read and understood and full of information. Now, that's, I think, the base. And I think if you have assured and done your homework, I call this homework, then the visual quality will automatically come. Otherwise, you just reproduce senseless, meaningless images which might look good, but really don't tell the tale. You need to know what you're looking at. Remember that example I showed 2 days ago, that triptych from Afghanistan with these kids running around on the street. It's more than what the picture apparently shows once you read the explanation, what's behind. So I really strongly encourage, and these people are incredibly generous with providing their information. The age of that colossal erratic boulder, which you saw at the beginning, who looks like sort of a World War I tank. I mean, we chopped that glacier, we chopped that erratic boulder. Of course, it needed official permission. So they really chopped off a chunk in order to find out the age by using this nuclide surface exposure dating, whereby they can measure the time a certain surface of the environment of nature has been exposed to sunlight. So they found out this huge erratic boulder had been exposed to sunlight 375,000 years, which means it came from very, very high up in today's Mont Blanc, where even most parts of Switzerland, the highest alpine peaks, were covered by ice. And it traveled in 3 different stages, changed its position until finally it stranded here, a kilometer from here, about 18,000 years ago. So that was a huge discovery. I was fascinated with that boulder because I had photographed it 35 years ago when I was in school, and it revealed its secret 35 years later in the right moment. So scientists are very, very generous, and they know their problems. Things are complicated, and politicians like easy answers, but there are no easy answers, and that's where science and art can meet.
And talking of politicians, let me just share this quickly with everyone for those who haven't seen it. There's a news from today, right, which you shared with me this morning, which I haven't seen. So UN chief backs new blueprint to end suicidal war on nature. Would you care to comment on this?
Yeah, it was the first thing I saw in the morning when I looked sort of, I wanted to see what happens in Burma, and I saw about that, and I said, Jesus, no again, you know. Of course, what he is announcing here will be a substantial document with contributions from many, many, many people, and now somebody has written a statement, and we have to stop, declare war on humans, war on nature. I think, to my understanding, and Ziyah, you have a personal experience in war. You need an enemy, but this terminology, if you declare war on nature, basically making nature your enemy, I mean, you have lost before you even start the battle, and that's exactly what has happened. This is so counterproductive. It is as counterproductive as a signal, save the glaciers, because glaciers cannot be saved. You know, and I thought this is just absurd to use this language. It's like, it reminds me like a war on poverty, the war on the pathogen, the war. It's a wrong approach. This is totally the wrong
I think they are using, I mean, I agree with you, of course, but I think they're using this terminology because I think they feel by using this war terminology, it's easier to mobilize the forces, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, we love this war terminology and military terminology. So maybe it's because of that. I mean, I'm just...
Yeah, but it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible.
Yeah. But I think it was a while ago, I think about after 9/11, there was one of the bosses of either CIA or heads of intelligence community in US who explicitly stated that the biggest threat is environmental issues, not war and terror. I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you remember that. That was pretty bold statement from someone who makes a living out of, you know, fighting terrorists. So anyway, it's people, if we still have a few minutes, if you have any questions for Daniel, or if you want to add anything, Daniel. But I
think I've said everything, but I'm happy to respond to.
Yeah. So the book is still available, right, on Thames and Hudson, I think. Yeah, people, if you have time, I have my copies. So it's, as usual, it's gorgeously produced book. It's the first one you didn't print at Steidl, is that correct?
Yeah, this one was printed in China.
Okay. It looks equally good. So I urge everyone to have a look at Daniel's profile on Thames Hudson and get this book. And I think with this, we can conclude this 3-part webinar. Again, it's all recorded, so you will have access to the recording. And stay with us for the continue. Let's see what we have next on 7's. Just give me a second. All right, so I think next on the schedule is gorgeous, amazing conversation with Seamus Murphy. And then there is a show that, if you can travel, can see in Centre Institute, an exhibition by Gary Knight. And I'll see you on March 9th, where we're gonna have, for our book club, where we're gonna have Jason Ashkenazi with his absolutely stunning body of work called Black Garden Trilogy. And for those who don't know Jason, he's an extraordinary character and spectacular photographer, and these are the books not to be missed. So if you have time, join us. This is a free event, obviously also available to all those who subscribed. And again, Daniel, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for staying with us through this 3 days. And I hope to see you for our next 7 book club, which is on March 9th. Daniel, thank you very much. Everyone, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, bye. Ciao.